Would you turn with me to the book of Exodus, chapter 19? I'll give you a second. It's going to be on the screens, and we're going to go through a chunk of this text as we continue this series, through this mini-series in the book of Exodus. Last week, we came out of this wilderness story, this wilderness journey, that God came out of this redemptive deliverance moment, and then they're stuck in the wilderness. And it was this challenging moment for the people. Today, we're going to pick that up, but I want to begin by asking you a question. If I were to ask you to build something important, if I were to ask you, just even think about what your response would be. If I were to ask you to build something important, something that lasts, something significant, a community, a company, a nation, maybe a family, a church, where would you begin? What's the first item on your bullet list? If you're like, I need to build something significant, where would I begin? And here's the thing, most of us would start with vision. We'd start with a mission statement. We'd start with a logo or a strategy, a dream of what could be, or maybe we'd start with some values. Aspirational words that look good on a wall: integrity, excellence, innovation, faith. At least that would get us on the same page and make sure that we're aligned with the basics, or at least that we want the same things, the foundational beliefs of some sort, right? But what if the way we thought about that was all wrong? Or at very least misguided? What if the first step to building something significant, something that would last, isn't belief or vision at first, but something far more practical, more formative, more daily life in its orientation? What if God doesn't begin by asking what we believe, but by teaching us how to live first? And this is weird for us as Western evangelicals. If you grew up in the church at all, if it's just we think belief first. But Jesus does something interesting with his disciples. For him, his disciples are following him for years before any one of them actually utters the profession that Jesus is Lord. If you read the Gospels, that doesn't come till, in some Gospels, the week of his death, or at very least the leading up to his death. Isn't that interesting? He didn't begin by testing their theology. He invited them into a way of life. He just said, come and see, follow me. Learn from my way of being. Walk with me, and I promise you, you will come to know me. You will come to have a life worthwhile. Before I get an email or a text or a comment, let me be clear. I'm not saying belief and truth don't matter, especially maybe more than ever in this world of fake news and multiple stories and events framed purely by whatever news agency you tend to subscribe to, or podcast, or conspiracy theory. It doesn't matter. We need truth and we need belief, absolutely. Because what we put our trust in is essential. And we're here in this church, we are all here because we believe that Jesus has the best information on what it means to be human. Jesus has the best information on what an abundant life looks like, what healthy parenting, healthy marriage, healthy grieving, healthy mourning, healthy celebration. We believe he is the best expression of an abundant life because he's the fullest expression of God. If you want to know what God is like, look at the person of Jesus. And we know. But here's the thing. When God sets out to build a people in the wilderness, people newly freed, as we saw last week, but not yet formed, he doesn't start with slogans or mission statements or this brand identity. He begins with, I will be with you. And he reveals his character through his actions so that when hardship comes, they'll remember what he is like. When the questions come, when people grumble and complain and are sad and anxious, and they start to doubt if God is with them in the cold, lonely, hungry hours of the night, he will actually remind them of how he's met them. It begins there with that encounter. And he meets them in their grumbling, in their complaint. But then, the first thing he does from that place of reminding them is he instructs them. He teaches them a way of life. Before God gives them the land of promise, he gives them instruction. And this is where we find Israel today in our reading. recently liberated, standing at the foot of a mountain, freedom still feeling like wilderness, but there God instructs them. And this is Exodus 19. And you'll know most of this. But Lord, would you open this word to us this morning, your word, your gift to us. Let us have ears that we would come not as having authority over this text, but as students under this text. Amen. Exodus 19:2. And after they set out from Rephidim, Rephidim is where God met their accusations by bringing water from a rock. Then they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain, the same mountain where God met Moses in the burning bush. And Moses went up to God away from the people, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all of the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation." These are the words that you are to speak to the Israelites. So Moses went back and summoned all the elders and the people that set before them all the words of the Lord that he had commanded them to speak. And the people all responded together, all of the people, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. And then God said these words, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of your slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven or above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bear the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Honor your father and mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, nor your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his donkey, his ox, anything that belongs to your neighbor." And when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain and smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, "Speak to yourself. Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not have God speak to us, or we surely will die." And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, sure, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning, from breaking the things that he just said." And the people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. This is the word of the Lord. Can you imagine standing at this mountain? Thunder, lightning. I mean, they've seen miracles, yes, but now they stand at a mountain and the very voice of God is coming through all manner of wild images, carving words of life into written stone. It honestly feels more like a fairy tale to us. We can scarcely think this is actually an event. And yet, this moment has shaped you far more than you know. Whether you grew up in the church or not, the 10 Commandments, they live somewhere in the ethos of our culture. You may not know them well. You may not know the order. This is so funny. Have you seen this recently? Where people will ask people who are wanting to get the 10 Commandments in school or in some place, "Oh, what are they?" And they have no idea. They know they're important, but they can't cite one. And you're like, how do we get here? How do we get to a place where we can put our energy and conflict into something we can't even know? It's like we know we're supposed to believe it, trust it, hope in it. We know it's important, but we don't know necessarily why. Right? It lives in our ethos for hundreds of years in this side of the West. But if you're like me, you also probably thought growing up, these are kind of primitive. These are kind of basic. They become so assumed in our moral life that they're kind of rules that you don't even have to think about. Sure, like, no one really murders. I don't even know what coveting really is. Yeah, we know adultery and sin. We know all those things. We've just come to assume all those things are bad. But there was a moment, a time, where that was not always true. And if you grew up in the church, it may be even more complicated because you've learned to look at the law with suspicion and disdain. The Pharisees were the bad guys. They were the best at keeping the law, and they're the bad guys with Jesus. So we've learned, okay, the law is bad. And we read the New Testament even with that lens, not realizing the critique is misguided. Just because the religious leaders of Jesus' day twisted them to become a burden, a system of bondage, so we learn that Jesus came to set us free from the law, as if the law itself was oppressive or legalistic. And somewhere along the way, this is how we've begun to view law equals bad, grace equals good. But that's an oversimplification. Oh, man, we have so many people here with the babies back for the first time. This is so sweet. Shout out to the Noyolas and the Hubbards. Come on. Maybe we'll just stop and have you guys parade the children around for a little bit. I won't make you do that yet. Here's the thing. That's an oversimplification that the Bible never makes. It just doesn't. The law was never given as a way to earn God's favor. No matter how much you see the critique, that's not what the Old Testament tells us. Not to deserve his love, to earn his favor. It wasn't given to a people. It was given to a people who already had his love to teach them how to live out of that love. That's why the Ten Commandments doesn't begin with a rule, but a reminder. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. He's saying, remember who I am. Remember what I've done for you. I didn't bring you here to die of thirst or abandon you in the desert. You didn't earn deliverance because you were good enough or holy enough. You cried out in suffering, in slavery, and pain, and I came to your rescue. You were enslaved, and I broke your chains. You were helpless, and I carried you out on wings like eagles, as he says here. Even then, deliverance came by grace, not merit. Grace before commandment, rescue before the rule. And here's the thing, if we can keep this order straight, deliverance first, instruction second, then we can finally see what God intended the law to be. The law wasn't given in Egypt to get people free. It was given in the wilderness to teach people how to stay free. The law wasn't given in Egypt to help people get free. The law was given in the wilderness to teach people how to stay free, to help them live into the freedom they've already given. The law was a gift because deliverance was a gift. And it trains us in how to enjoy the gift of the freedom we've already been given. I say this all the time, but I mean, have you ever known someone who struggled in recovery or with sobriety? They come out of the chaos of the chains that their life have created for themselves. And if you say, you're free, now go be free, freedom's the last thing they want. They know their freedom under their power will just lead to bondage, maybe death. What they long for is someone to say, hey, will you learn to live with me in this way so that freedom is possible for you? Because freedom in that way is just addiction again. But freedom in a community of love and support to retrain us to enjoy this gift. Freedom then becomes possible. Are you with me? The law was always meant for Israel to learn to depend on God's presence, not replace it. The law in God's hands is not a cage for us, for the human spirit. It's not a burden for a community. It's a compass that keeps us moving towards life. It's a mirror that reminds us that we can't do it on our own. This is why it's so fascinating that in the Hebrew, they're not even called commandments. That's just something we've put onto it. In the Hebrew, they're called the 10 words. So anytime you hear a rabbi talk, or Tim Mackey from the Bible Project, or someone who's more soaked in the Old Testament, they don't call them commandments because it kind of misstrews what's happening here. They're called the 10 words. Why words? Just remember the story we've been soaked in. In Genesis, God speaks 7 times. His words create all of creation. In Genesis, those 7 words create all of the cosmos. But in Exodus, 10 words form his people. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks says it like this: in Genesis, God creates order in the natural world. But in Exodus, he creates order in the moral world. The same voice that called light out of darkness now calls his community into being by a new order. The gift of these 10 words. In the Jewish mind, words aren't just something that articulate a feeling. They have power in the world. They become a powerful force that reorders the structure of human life. And if you looked at every Western culture from this time on, you will see how these 10 commandments and all the laws that follow shape moral order, whether we realize it or not. There's power in these words, but more than that, there's relationship in the words. God speaks, something must happen. Are you with me? But this is not just about personal freedom. It's about purpose, vocation. It's not just about rule keeping for the sake of being good enough. We've already dealt with that. This is about something far more important. He didn't just free them from Egypt because he freed them for something in particular, a calling, a vocation, a vision of life that was entrusted to human beings at the very beginning. This is why he goes into this and says, now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, God says, then out of all the nations, you will be my treasured possession. Although the earth, the whole earth is already mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. A kingdom of priests. Priests, maybe if you grew up in the Catholic tradition or the Orthodox tradition, you have a mindset of this, but priests serve a sacred function in the world. They stand between heaven and earth, right? Just like Adam and Eve. In a heaven and earth creation, they have a heaven and earth calling to steward and care. Priestly order is that I stand in this intersection of heaven and earth. They represent God to the world, and they embody his character and reveal what he is like, but they also represent the world before God, intercede, standing in the gap. They were meant to be living bridges of grace between a holy God and a hurting world. But how can you do that? How can you stand in the intersection of heaven and earth if you don't look like the God you represent? What picture of God will the world get? How can they do that if they don't bear his name? This is why the third commandment is so important. It's this bridge between worship and the world, between our relationship with God and our relationship with each other and the world. I mean, you probably, like me, were taught that the translation is, don't take the Lord's name in vain. As if his name was sacred. It is sacred, but it's we can't use it. We shouldn't make it dirty with the way we use it. Any of you had your mouth washed out if you said the word God or anything like that growing up? Oh, I see some hands. This is one of the most mistranslated texts, misunderstood texts. It has nothing to do with how we use the name of God. Even though there's wisdom in that, right? I will correct my children if they take his name in vain. Partly it's in me, but that's not what this is saying. We often think it's about language. Don't swear. Don't use God's name irreverently. But the Hebrew word nashah doesn't mean take. It means carry or bear. The commandment literally says, you shall not bear the name of the Lord your God in vain. To bear God's name is to belong to him, to represent him rightly, to carry his reputation into the world. That's what bearing his name means. He's giving his people this covenant to be family, and he says, I'm placing my name on you. So what you do, the world will think of me. Think of that the next time you want to put a church sticker on the back of your car or a tattoo on your arm, which is great. I don't have the audacity to do that because I don't want to represent Jesus by how I just cut you off. Lord, maybe one day. But Lord, make me the type of person that when people encounter me, can it be the type of persons that when we come into the world, when they meet us, they go, that person, what joy, what compassion, what love. Wow, that person reminded me of almost like someone holy. I don't even know how words for it. There's something sacred in them. I feel seen and loved when they're around. They're not witnessing to me. They're not handing me a tract. Their love is so overwhelming that they bear the name. This is Israel's vocation, and this is our vocation, to be a kingdom of priests, to stand at the intersection of heaven and earth. And this is the conviction given to Israel, but breathed on us today by the Holy Spirit, to live in such a way that when people encounter us, they get a glimpse of what God is like. That's what the law is forming. Not rule keepers, but righteous image bearers, people that look more like him, a community that embodies God's character in the world. And back in the story, we see they've heard God's voice. They've seen his power. They've entered. Don't you love that before they even hear what God asks of them, they say, we'll do whatever God says. And I just like, I don't make that. I don't make those bets anymore. In my weakest moments, maybe I do. But I just like, yeah, whatever. I'll do whatever. It's like, anything? Like, don't do that with your kids. We can have whatever we want. We can watch whatever we want. No, that's not what I mean. There are limits. But I love that Israel, this is how they've seen him as deliverer. Before he even gives them instruction, they're like, we'll do whatever he says. It's like a people wholly bought in. And yet, we know how the story goes. They hear his voice. They see his power. They enter his covenant. And yet, 40 days later, not even 2 months goes by. Moses is still on this mountain receiving more instructions, more words, and these people are like, yes, this is amazing. But he goes too long. He's away for 40 days, and they get scared. And in this story that we've all heard about, the making of the forming of the golden calf, they melt down their gold, they cast it as a calf, and they start to worship this image. And it's supposed to register with us that they're not just breaking a command, they're breaking the first commandment that God told them not to do. I am the Lord your God. Don't make any graven images in my name. It's supposed to be a little humorous. Like these people, 40 days in, can't even keep the first one. How stubborn. How broken. How bad. How reckless are these people who have a great calling. The ink isn't even dry on the covenant, and they're already betraying it. And here's the thing. If this was only a human story, if this was a story about another God in the region they lived in, then we know how it would end. The covenant over, the people dead, lost in the wilderness. But that's the difference of this story. When we break the deal's not off. Because that's not who God is. When Moses comes down the mountain and sees what's happened, his heart breaks. He is fueled with anger. He shatters the stone tablets, right? We've all seen this if you've ever seen the old movie. It's this intense scene. God judges the people that were at the heart of it because he's like, they're a cancer. And this early on in building a nation, if you let that start, something will happen. It's the same as in the New Testament, Ananias and Sapphira. If you know that story, where God, they lie. They lie at the heart of the church, and they're judged. I mean, it takes me back a second to go like, how free am I with my words and my judgment and my integrity, my honesty? And we think that, that's what's going to happen. God is just going to wipe out Israel. That's the story. And that's the moment that Moses actually steps into the role that God has always intended for his people, the priestly role. Moses, in his anger, doesn't say smite them. He goes back to the mountain and he says, Lord, will you forgive their sin? They're betraying you, yes, but will you forgive their sin? And if not, include me. Blot my name out of the book of life, is what he says, the book you've written. Moses, in essence, says, God, I know we're stubborn, and I know they deserve something else, but be who you always are. Can you just be who you are? Merciful, faithful, the God who carries us on eagle's wings, and God listens. And the people are spared. The covenant is renewed. New tablets are carved. The presence of God goes with them still. And this is the heartbeat of grace. Not grace that just gets us out of Egypt, but grace that stays in the wilderness. Grace that meets us in our failure, in our grief, in our questioning, in our doubt, in our idolatry. And grace that says, I will be covenantly faithful enough for both of us. And it will be enough for you. I will be faithful, and that will be enough because that's who I am. And this pattern repeats over and over again. If you've ever read just this section of the Torah, these first 5 books, it is like one giant cycle of family story, of bad patterns of family stories, the same sins, the same son and father over and over again. And then you get to the nation of Israel, and it's the same complaining, grumbling, instruction. As people break the law, Moses goes and speaks with God. After breaking the law, they were just given, and he gives them more instruction. Okay, I need to flesh this out. What does this look like? What does this kingdom of priests look like in a world that doesn't want anything to do with it, in a stubborn people? And Moses goes and gets instruction and comes back, and they break it. And this is the pattern all throughout these sections. Rebellion, instruction. Rebellion, instruction. Rebellion, instruction. And 613 laws later, Israel spends a year of their life at the foot of this mountain. This is wild because if you start from Genesis and get to Exodus 19, it's 69 chapters. And in that time, you have one chapter that covers all of the creation of the cosmos. And then thousands of years, lots of different families, lots of different stories, whole empires rise and fall. And then you get to this section, and there's 2.5 books dedicated to 1 year of getting the instruction at Sinai. The rest of Exodus, all of Leviticus, 10 chapters in Numbers, all this single account. Do you think this is important to the people of Israel? And yet we write it off saying, oh, how primitive. The law, man, we have grace. We don't need the law. But we misunderstand its heart, which means we misunderstand God's heart. I'm not saying we live by that law today. That's not what I'm saying at all. But we have to get it because over 30% of Torah is written in this form right here. We need eyes to see. And Moses models the vocation of the people of God here, to stand in the gap, to plead for mercy, to reflect God's heart back to God, and to intercede for a world that still forgets it's freed. That's what it means to be a kingdom of priests, not perfectly abiding by a rule book, but people who, when the world is going to hell, and even when the people of covenant, the people of faith, break covenant and betray it and violate one another, and the heartbeat of why the church has been blessed with the presence of the Spirit. Even in that moment, we come back and say to God over and over again, will you be who you are? We know who you are. We've seen it. Will you be who you are for us? I know that we can't do it, but you can. And after this golden calf, after the covenant is renewed, God reveals his heart to Moses in this section of text, which you might know well, but may not. And I just want to read this because this is one of those verses. This is Exodus 34. The Lord, this is after the renewal of the covenant, after the golden calf, after more instruction, this is what he says to Moses. The Lord, compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving the wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave guilt unpunished. He does punish children and their children of the sin of the parents for the 3rd and 4th generation. This is one of those anchor verses worth memorizing. This is the most quoted section of Scripture. This is the most quoted verse in the Bible by the Bible itself. It gets quoted all throughout the Bible. New Testament, Old Testament, it's the most repeated verse we know. The Lord, compassionate and gracious. And let me just say this. This becomes a north star for a generation of faith. Because what it says is God is going to take all human evil, all human raw, and turn it into tov, turn it into good. This is the heart of Genesis 2 and 3. He's saying, I'm still this God. I will take all of the bad that you think you're capable of, and somehow I will lead you towards goodness. That's my heart. And to be clear, what this doesn't mean is that God punishes the innocent grandchildren for their parents' mistake. That's not what he's saying. We already know. God doesn't need to intervene for that. You all know the wounds of your grandparents and parents just by living with them. And I say that with humility and grace as a parent. I know my kids will receive the wounds that are undealt with in myself. I know my sins will show up in them. And this is saying that won't be the last word. God will be who he is. He will attend to every generation's disobedience, obedience as it is. Yours and mine. but he will always be himself, compassionate and gracious, just and faithful. And what good news. Anyone have that when you're like with your family and you're like, Lord, is this my destiny? Some of us get to say, Lord, I pray this is my destiny. I look at my mom and I'm like, man, if I have 1/10 of her faithfulness when I'm 70, like, it's a good life. I know that that's a lot of people, not a lot of people's story, but man, Lord, would that be my story for my grandkids and their grandkids and every generation? God saying, you weren't enough, but you know who was enough? I was. And every gap that you couldn't fill, I will fill. And every invitation I will make to them will let them take a step towards health and wholeness. Are you with me? You don't have to have kids to see this. You just have to be an adult who's paying attention. You just have to have a relationship with people who are ahead of you and to see how, man, they have really come back to the Lord and said, Lord, will you instruct me? Will it not be about rule keeping, but about formation? Will you make something significant out of me? That's what God's trying to do here. To form a nation, to form a people. I mean, if there was ever a moment for America to go, wow, like, apparently the world isn't just always up and up. The fracture that our country lives in, I'm not even speaking politically or partisan, I'm just saying there's a level of, we thought this, I guess this is a little more fragile than we thought. I often say, I lived in the greatest decade in human history, the 90s. Being like coming up in the 90s, technology wasn't everything. It was like camcorders, right? But we had enough, and there was the least amount of conflict that has ever been in a single decade in the 90s, which is crazy to think. And it may be the most single peaceful decade in human history. Do we look at the secular culture and say, man, I guess it got us there? Or do we say, no, there's still something fragile in the state of wholeness, and we can't build it on our own? We got to stop building towers of Babel that can get us to the place of God. We need instruction. We need a way. We need life. We need a rule that can hold us and ground us. The law was given to shape us, not enslave us. It reveals what love looks like when it takes form in a community, how redeemed people live in right relationship, which is the word righteous. Take whatever spiritual language you have in the word righteousness, like it's about purity or whatever. No, the word righteous in Hebrew just means a state of right relationship. So if you're a righteous father, you have a certain type of relationship with your children. If you're a righteous husband, you have a particular relationship with your spouse. To be a right friend, a righteous friend, you have a particular relationship. It's about a wholeness, a shalom, a right relatedness to one another. And that's somehow what he's doing with this law, these 613 laws. There's something deeper here. How redeemed people live in a right relationship with God and with one another. That's what the law was all about. And then it forces us to ask deeper questions, because one day there'll be another mediator, another Moses-like figure that will climb a mountain and not write a law on the stone tablets, but he'll write it on the hearts of his people. And he climbs not with tablets in hand, but with sin of the world on his shoulders. And he would say, just as Moses did, but on behalf of the whole world, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Father, if only they knew how good you were, they couldn't put me to death. But that covenant wouldn't just be for Israel. It would be sealed for the world forever in the life of Jesus. And here's the thing, we don't live under the covenant anymore. That's not what I'm expressing. I'm not saying live by. Have you ever heard of that book, The Year of Living Biblically? A guy tried to live by every commandment that was given in the Torah. Like to the point where he even stoned someone. He took out pebbles and stoned a woman who had violated a covenant law. And he writes this book, and it's funny. But the point is, he's missing the point. The point of all of that scripture is not to say this is how you live right. The whole point is to say, you can't do it. Israel couldn't do it for 40 days. The point is to say, this is a law book the point is that we read the story and say, this is what the law meant to these people, Lord, will you form us? We no longer live under that covenant, but we still need his instruction, his teaching, his way. It's the only thing that will anchor a community, a church, a family, a life, that we might bear the name of Christ. Because in our freedom, we still need to be formed. And in our pain, in our wounding, we still need a way to walk out love that looks healthy and whole and righteous. We can't do it on our own. Are you with me? Here's the thing, when we read the story of the law, the 10 words, this covenant, the right response is not to stand over the law or these stories as critics, right, as morally superior. It's to kneel under them as students, literally to get on our knees and to say, Lord, will you change my heart that I might learn to love you and love my neighbor, because I can't do it on my own. The whole point of reading these stories is to get to that point, to say, I can't do it on my own, but Lord, you will be faithful and you will help. Will you form me into a healthy freedom? And I just want to invite us as we close, as we come to the space of response, I just want to invite you very simply to hold this truth before God, that you've been delivered by grace and you're being formed by grace.